So no one likes to come up short. No one likes to not relate to me on this one, you guys. But I think we probably all can. You guys, when I was in high school, man, that term of do not measure up, man, that was something I lived in high school. Coming up short, that happened all the time in high school. And it happened in all kinds of areas. We'll throw that right back. Awesome. It happened in all kinds of areas. It happened in academics. Man, in academics, you guys, I'm sorry to say I would be a poor model for our high school students when I was in high school because I came up short all the time. And I would take the hard courses. I would sign up for physics and chemistry and biology and all the hard sciences. But then my problem was, you guys, I would sit in the back with the slackers, and I was the leader of the slackers. So I could have all the ideas of I'm going to take the hard courses because somehow there's got to be some kind of future for me. But I would sit in the back and just chat with my friends and completely ignore the teacher. And they were tired of me. They just let me go and just let me sit in the back and not pay attention. They knew that it would catch up to me. And then when it came to homework, I spent every evening out with my buddies skateboarding. Every evening. I was not doing homework. I was out skateboarding with my buddies and listening to music. And that was me in high school. I was coming up short. I remember one particular test, a physics test. I remember where I was sitting. I remember the pencil I was holding. And I remember taking that test, and I was so unprepared that I didn't even know I was unprepared. You guys, you know it's bad when you don't even know how bad you are. Right? Then it's like even worse than bad. So I was taking this test and I was putting answers down there and I was flying through, flipping pages, and I was done. And I step up, I'm done. And I look at all the kids who were on the front row. They're just furiously writing. They're not even past the first page. And I handed that in, and I didn't even know that I didn't know. You guys, that's the worst it could get. And I still remember that was the lowest score I've ever got on a test. I got 17, not 17 out of 20, 17%. That was my mark on that, and I don't even know why I got the 17. You know, those were pity marks, I think. So, you guys, I fell short when it came to academics. When it comes to volleyball, I never scored a point. So, you know, Kayani, they won their championship yesterday. I mean, just amazing. We've actually got a great volleyball team this year at Heritage, and yeah, thanks, Roger. There we go, a little angle there. And you know, you guys, in school, I never scored a point in volleyball. I never made a goal in soccer. I never scored a run in baseball. I did all these three things. I never got 1 point for my team ever. All through middle school and high school, I did not measure up when it came to sports as well. Even riding a dirt bike, you guys, I didn't measure up. Like my friends, they were in motocross, and they'd be flying through the air on their dirt bikes. And finally, my brother and I, we got this nice dirt bike, and we made this little jump, and it was about that high. You guys, I go off that thing. My first time going off that thing, it's over the handlebars. Over the handlebars, the whole bike is cartwheeling along the ground. I couldn't even measure up and riding a dirt bike. And I don't know if you can relate with me on this, but sometimes it feels like when it comes to the scales of things, I'm not measuring up, right? I'm falling short on the scale. I wasn't much value. You know, they use a scale to measure value in the olden days. I wasn't much value in academics, in sports, even in riding dirt bike. I was coming up short. And here's the thing. We all come up short in times in life, don't we? Do you ever come up short, Heritage? Remember, Heritage is a place where we can be real, right? We don't just come to polish our halos here, right? We fall short, right? There's mistakes that we make. And if you're new to faith, here's the thing I thought about faith. When I first became a Christian, after all that, I became a Christian at 18 after high school, or just getting out of high school. When I became a Christian, I thought that when you're a Christian, it'll be you can grow really fast, and pretty soon you won't make mistakes. Like pretty soon you'll just have this faith thing all figured out. You won't make mistakes because you'll be kind of perfected in your faith. And the older I got, I just kept thinking, when is that time where everything's going to go smooth and I'm just going to have it all figured out? And now, Rebecca and I are in there. Well, I'm in my 50s. I won't talk about my wife, but, I'm in my 50s and I'm just like, I still don't have it figured out. So if you're new to your faith thinking that all these people here must have it all figured out, you guys, we all fall short, right? We do. We all fall short. None of us measure up. And that could sound depressing, but that is actually a core part of Christian theology. A core part of Christian theology is that in God's eyes, we don't measure up. We don't pass the test, right? We fall short on the scale. We do, and that's part of Christian theology, but that's the bad news. There is bad news in Christian theology. Thankfully, it comes with the good news, right? And the good news is that even though we fall short, God tips the scales in our favor, right? God balances us out. And that's what we're going to talk about today from the book of Daniel. Because even though Daniel was 550 years before Jesus, who came to officially declare the good news, in Daniel chapter 5, there's a picture of the gospel 500 years before the gospel is brought down to earth. So as we look at Daniel 5, there is a lot to say about not measuring up. And Daniel 5 talks about the scales. And that's what we're going to talk about today. In Daniel chapter 5, it shares with us the bad news, but it also points us towards the good news. Because none of us measure up, but the grace of God helps tip the scales in our favor. So if you have your Bibles, turn to Daniel chapter 5. And let me give you a little context before we get into that, just to know where we are in the book of Daniel. The context is, last week we were in Daniel chapter 4, and we talked about King Nebuchadnezzar. Well, today, as we go into chapter 5, there have been decades that have passed between chapter 4 and chapter 5. King Nebuchadnezzar is no longer around. His grandson, Belshazzar, is on the throne. See, Daniel is a book that gives highlights over decades. So Daniel chapter 1, Daniel himself, who wrote the book of Daniel when he was old, but in chapter 1, Daniel was 15 years old. When Jerusalem fell, when he was captured and brought to Babylon, he was 15, he was just a young teenager. Then by chapter 4, that we talked about yesterday, between chapter 1 and chapter 4, 15 years passed. So yesterday in chapter 4, Daniel was 30 or 35 years old in that era of King Nebuchadnezzar. And King Nebuchadnezzar was full of pride, and he got humbled for 7 years. Then he repented and came back, and God restored to him his glory as a king. A couple decades later, now we have Daniel chapter 5. And so Daniel now, he's about 60. He's 60, 65 years old as he relays this story in Daniel chapter 5, and it's filled with amazing history. You guys, I love history. I love to hear about the Babylonian Empire and the Persians and the Romans and the Greeks, and it's all in the Bible. It's amazing. In fact, Daniel chapter 5, here's a little information for you. Daniel chapter 5 was seen for years as a reason why the Bible is not accurate. Historians would point to Daniel chapter 5, and historians would say, we know everything about the Babylonian Empire. We know about King Nebuchadnezzar, that's in there. We know about how Babylon took over Egypt and took over Assyria and took over Jerusalem. We know about all that, historians would say. But when you look at Daniel chapter 5, there's never been any evidence of Belshazzar. Never. So historians would say we know about the whole lineage of the kings of Babylon. We know when it started, when it ended. That's right in the Bible, but there's no such thing as Belshazzar. That's just made up. So the Bible just makes up things just to prove a point. And then one day, a guy named J. Taylor was at an archaeological site in the ziggurat of Ur. I like to say that. That's a great thing. The Ziggurat of Ur, right? It's in Iraq. And actually, Saddam Hussein did some work on it when he was in power to help restore it a little bit. But the Babylonians in their day, the Ziggurat of Ur was already there. And King Nebuchadnezzar and a bunch of the other kings, they helped restore this mini pyramid. Well, it's really big, but it's not pointy. It comes to a plateau on top. But it's this big ziggurat, kind of like a pyramid. And Jay Taylor was doing an archaeological expedition on this ziggurat out there, and he knew the Babylonians had restored it back in 500 BC. And lo and behold, as he's digging, he comes upon this full line of the kings of Babylon, and then he comes upon another tablet and another inscription and another kind of conical sphere and another inscription, and there it is. Belshazzar, all over the place. And the historians had to say, this is right from chapter 5, they had to say, we were wrong. The Bible is correct. Belshazzar was the last king of Babylon. And in chapter 5, we hear about how Babylon came to an end. Because chapter 5 is the end of Babylon. And history tells us when it happened and what happened next, but the Bible tells us how it happened and why it happened. I think that's amazing. I think that's great history, and the Bible is just filled with accurate, amazing history, which is rich. And one thing else we have to remember about the time of Babylon, they were living in a society where everything was allowed, right? Everything went. They were in a pluralistic culture where they just accepted everybody's cultures and said it's all valid. It's all equal. Now, there's parts of living in a pluralistic culture that are great. Like when different cultures bring different kinds of food, I celebrate that, right? I think that's awesome, right? Because I like to be adventurous in my eating, and that's a really good aspect of a pluralistic culture where everybody's coming from every different area, and they're just like, hey, you should try this food. I'm all about that. Or when they have different music, right? I have a really eclectic taste in music. I listen to everything, and I love diversity in music. I love diversity in food. I love diversity in art. People are bringing different kinds of art from all around the world, and that's really good in a pluralistic culture. You can experience all the beauty of God's creativity. But the danger in a pluralistic culture is when everybody brings their own truth and everybody treats it as equal. Because there is only one truth, right? There's truth, and then there's not truth, right? And when everybody brings their own morality and they say like all the morality is equal, I disagree, right? That's the negative aspect of a pluralistic culture. And in Daniel's era in Babylon, it was like all truth is truth and no truth is truth. All morality is good and no morality. It's all just live and let live. Do whatever you want. It's all good, right? And that was their pluralistic culture at the time. And you'll see that from this King Belshazzar, and that's why he gets in trouble. But we live in that same society today. We live in a pluralistic culture where everybody just brings everything. And some parts of that you can celebrate, which are awesome. God's got a lot of diversity in this world. But some parts are, hey, no, that's black and white, right? This is truth and this isn't. This is morality, this is good morality, and this is not good morality. And we can make that distinction, but the king in Babylon was not, and he paid the price. So let's get into Daniel chapter 5. That's the context on this story. King Belshazzar had a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem. So he's having this massive party, and he says, bring all those holy things that you got out of that temple and rub it in the face of all these Israelites who are here. So that's what's happening at the party. So they got the goblets. They were drinking from them, the king and his nobles, and his wives and his concubines were all there. So he said, bring all the women. That's what the king was saying. And this was not a normal thing for a normal king party, right? The queen would be there, the king would be there, but not all the ladies, like all the extras. They wouldn't all be there. But he's just like, bring everybody. And so that we might drink with them. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles and his wives and his concubines drank from them. And as they drank the wine, they praised the gods, small g, of gold and silver and bronze and iron and wood and stone. So this was an unusually wild, massive party. This was hedonism. Right? Hedonism is when your main goal is immediate pleasure and you don't care about anything else. That's what hedonism is. And this is a party of hedonism. It was deliberately sensual and sexual. They brought all the concubines, all the wives. It doesn't go into detail, but that was unusual. And that meant it's a different kind of party. All right? They were deliberate in their contempt. There's contempt against God and God's people. By drinking and getting drunk off these goblets, there was deliberate decadence. They would toast the gods of gold and silver and wood with the goblets of the temple of God while there was all the sexuality going on. This was the most unbelievable, decadent, sinful, horrible, terrible party you can ever imagine. And you might wonder, why? Why would he throw this whole party? Where's the why about it? And it helps us to know the history of what's happening at that time. And here's just my prediction, and a prediction of Timothy Keller, who as well says this. The Medes and the Persians were on the doorstep of taking over Babylon. I mean, they had already been, and history shows that they had been working their way towards Babylon. You know, Babylon beat out the Assyrians and the Egyptians and the Israelites, but now here come the Persians and the Medes. They're marching in, and they're on the doorstep of King Belshazzar. He knows he's not going to win this one, right? This is not the glory days of King Nebuchadnezzar. That was his grandpa. King Nebuchadnezzar, I mean, that's when the kingdom was thriving, right? And here he is. It's 87 years into the Babylonian Empire, and this king is weak. And so I believe he threw the party because, well, we're going to die. We might as well go out with a bang, right? We might as well just no holds barred, no morality. You know, we have no hope. And remember, it's a pluralistic culture. They don't have hope in truth. They're not like Daniel. Daniel believed in one truth, one morality, one God, and he had hope in that. But the king had no hope. He was like, we're going to be overtaken, so just throw it all out the window and let's party like it's 1999, right? And the world's going to end, right? And so let's just keep going on this. And so that's why I believe he was partying like that, because he had no hope. And he just threw it all out the window. That's what happens when you are faced with morality, but you have no hope. Where do you turn? There's nowhere to turn. So, verse 5, this is what happens. Suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. And the king watched the hand as it wrote, and his face turned pale. He was so frightened that his legs became weak and they were knocking. So this is where we get the term the writing on the wall, right? There's a lot of terms in Daniel that we still use today, a lot of phrases, and they were initiated in the book of Daniel. I think that's pretty awesome. And so right now we use that term, the writing on the wall, when we kind of view there's some impending doom. Like that company is going to go bankrupt next week, the writing's on the wall, right? So all the signs are pointing towards doom, towards something is going to go wrong. That's what the writing on the wall means. Started right here in the book of Daniel. Verse 7, and we're going to skip around a little bit. The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, diviners, and then he said to his wise men of Babylon, whoever reads the writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around their neck, and he will be made third highest ruler in the kingdom. And this is what we see in the book of Daniel all the time. It happens with different kings in different contexts, with visions and dreams and supernatural things. And it's always like, bring the astrologers, bring the messengers, and it always ends the same. No one can interpret it except Daniel, right? He's the one who could. Then all the kings and the wise men came in, and they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. So King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale, and his nobles were baffled. We're going to skip down a little bit, but the queen says, isn't there this guy who helped your grandpa out? His name is Daniel. He's older now, right? He's in his 60s, but isn't there this guy? I bet he can interpret the dream. So the king says, let's find Daniel, and let's bring him in. So Daniel comes in, and he says, now I've heard that you were able to to give interpretations and to solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. And remember, Daniel had been given all these promises by different kings in different situations, and Daniel was already a leader in Babylon throughout his life, and Daniel had been given all these things. So I love how he answers. And think of this. He's 60 now. He's not 15. He's not 30 like in chapter 4. He's 60. And so he answers with some snark. And I like that. I like that. In fact, this is one of my favorite chapters in the book of Daniel, because Daniel just lays it all right. He doesn't care, right? In chapter 4, when he's 30, he's like trembling before the king. Oh, I don't know if I want to tell you the truth behind this dream. But now Daniel's like, whatever. Verse 17, then Daniel answered the king, you can keep your gifts for yourself and give all your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. Don't you love that? I love it when the Old Testament is just like super clear and crisp and dramatic. I love that. Keep your gifts for yourself, but I'll tell you what it means. And so he goes on, verse 22. But first of all, he goes over chapter 4. He says, this is what happened with your grandpa. You know, your grandpa was full of pride, and he paid the price, but he repented from his pride. And then God restored to him the kingdom. But Belshazzar, not with you. That's not going to happen. Verse 22, but you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, even though you knew all this. You knew about your grandpa. You knew about what you should be doing, but instead, what are you doing? You're throwing this party, right? You're just throwing all the morality out the window, and then you're rubbing it in the face of the Israelites and in the face of God himself by having the sensual party with the wine and with the goblets from the temple. He says, you knew all this. You did not honor the God who holds in his hands your life in all your ways. Therefore, he sent the hand that wrote the inscription. And then he talks about these words. Now, these words that are written, there's 3 different words, and the words are actually in Aramaic. So they could read the words, but they didn't know why the words were there. They didn't know they were just 3 individual words. They didn't know what that meant. They knew the language, Aramaic, but they didn't know what it meant. So Daniel says, verse 26, here is these words, and here is what these words mean. Mene, which means numbered. And he says, here's why it says numbered. Because God has numbered your days. And not only has God numbered your days, but your time's up. Your numbers are gone, right? God has numbered your days, and your reign is brought to an end. Numbers. Numbered, your days are numbered. The second verse, 27. Tekel. You have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Weighed is the word tekel. So it was numbered and weighed. And then he says this, you've been weighed on the scales and found wanting. I love that. He's bold, right? The Message says, you've been weighed on the scales and you don't weigh much. You don't weigh much. The International Standard Version, you've been weighed on the scales and you don't measure up, right? So King Belshazzar did not measure up. He was weighed on the scales, and God goes, nope, that does not pass. That does not measure up. So he gives him the third word, Perez, which means divided. Your kingdom is divided, and it will be given to the Medes and to the Persian. Numbered, weighed, divided. Your days are numbered. You've been weighed on the scales. You don't weigh enough. You don't measure up. And therefore, your kingdom will be divided. And those Medes and Persians who are on the doorstep, they will come in and end your reign. And this is political, but it's spiritual as well. The kingdom is divided because you are spiritually divided. Verse 29, something surprising happens. Then Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple. A gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. So the king did keep his word, right? And that always happens to Daniel. He tells the truth. the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and he gets rewarded even though the truth is hard truth. But then verse 30 and 31 ends the reign of the Babylonian Empire. That very night, the very night of the party, the dream was interpreted. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain. And Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. And that is the end of the Babylonian Empire. 87 years, and the Bible tells us not just when it ended, but why it ended. It ended because this king was so full of pride, he rubbed it in everybody's faces, and God said, you don't measure up, your days are done. And the Medes and the Persians took over from there. But the book of Daniel isn't done. We go on next week with chapter 6, and Darius the Mede. And he was slightly better than those Babylonian kings, but not much better. So there's something we can learn from these passages. And I want to focus specifically on these three different words, because these three different words that were written in Aramaic 2,500 years ago, they're relevant to us today. So think about the first word. The first word is mene, which means numbered. So what this tells us, I think it's relevant to us as it was the king. You guys, our days are numbered, right? Our days are numbered. Thankfully, God's not telling us your number's up. We're still here, right? We're alive. We're here right now. But our days are numbered. You guys, sometimes that can be depressing for me. As the years just march on and my time gets shorter and shorter, right? I've mentioned before, the average guy in America lives to 76. The average lady lives to 78, right? I hope I make it to the average. I hope I make it past the average. But the average of my people is like mid-60s in my family. So my days are numbered. Your days are numbered. I wish I had 5 lifetimes, you guys. I really wish I do. There are so many things that I want to do in life that I'll never get to do. I'm going to say probably, but I'll never get to do them, right? I'm a pretty adventurous guy. I would love to do so many things. I wish I had 5 lifetimes to master like skydiving and rock climbing and kayaking, whitewater rafting, and do all that stuff. But I have so many things I'd love to do. I don't have time for all that. Like, I just have time for a couple hobbies, right? And do the things I love, pastor this church, take care of my family, right? Take care of the house and the yard and all that. I just have that much time. I wish I had more. But my days are numbered, and I don't know when those numbers are going to end. I don't know. That's a mystery. We don't know that. Last week, apparently the rapture was supposed to happen, if you follow TikTok, I think. You know, and I didn't, my daughters had to make me aware of this. Dad, there's a rapture thing going on. And just like, I'm not on TikTok, so I don't know. But, you know, one guy made a prediction, and everyone's like, and some people were taking drastic measures because the rapture was going to happen. You guys, something you got to know about me is that I'm never going to be that guy who's predicting the end of the world. I'm just not going to be that guy, right? I don't, this may sound bad. Some of you might not like this. I don't really care when the rapture happens. It can happen tomorrow or 100 years from now. It doesn't really bother me because I want to be ready today. I'm not worried about like, oh, well, the signs of the times say it might happen at 3:30 on October 31st. I don't care. I don't care because it may be today. And so because my days are numbered and because God says, you're not going to know the day or the hour when I'm going to return. I could be gone tomorrow, whether Jesus comes back or whether I get in a car crash, right? So I want to make today count. I want to make today count. I want to live today like it might be my last day. Our days are numbered, and that is not depressing. It's actually healthy for us to know. It's actually healthy for us to think about, because if we think about the fact that our days are numbered, we'll make today count with the things that are the most important to us. Our faith, our family, our friends, those relationships, our work for God. Those are the most important things for us. If we know our days are numbered, our days are going to count because we're going to take them seriously. It's okay. I'm not going to be able to do everything in the world. That's okay. I'm going to do what's most important today. So I think it's just very relevant what God was telling the king, your days are numbered. Listen to what James 4:14 says. You don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are but a mist that appears for a little bit of time and then it what? Vanishes. It's gone. It's here, it's gone. In the scale of history, we're just like a mist. We're here and we're gone. But in that moment, if we realize that God makes every day count, we can do amazing things for Him. I find myself encouraged by the fact that my days are numbered because I'm going to make today count. So the second word, tekel, is weighed. It's weighed. God evaluates Belshazzar's life and his reign, and it fails to meet our standard. And you guys, here's where the Christian theology comes in. Romans 3 verse 23 says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So I was talking to you about how I fall short. Who all falls short? All people do. We all fall short, and that is Christian theology. No one measures up to God because God is so righteous, He's so amazing, He's so powerful, and we are not. We are sinful, fallen creatures. We are born with a sinful nature that is against us to begin with. So we are weighed, and we're found coming up short every time. James 2 verse 10 says this, whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles at just one point is what? Guilty. Guilty of breaking all of it. So you guys, you might be saying like, I'm pretty good. I'm not as bad as that King Belshazzar because I can do 99% of the law, of the rules, of the guidelines, of the Christian things. I can do 99%, but according to James, you're just 1% short of being good enough. So when God looks at us, we're not balancing out, right? We're not balancing out. And that's why the next word is important. Divided. Perez, divided. Because we're not balancing out, that means we're going to be divided from God's goodness. It means we're going to be divided from a relationship with Him. This is terrible news, right? This is not a good news sermon at this point. We're divided because we've been numbered, our days are numbered, we've been weighed, and we're not found good enough. We're found too light. We're not measuring up to God's standard. And if we don't measure up to God's standard, we're going to be divided like King Belshazzar was. But here's where the good news comes in. God knows this, right? God knows that we're divided. Romans 3 verse 24 says this, and all are justified freely by His grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. So God said like, hey, I want a relationship with you, but you're not measuring up, so I'm going to send my one and only Son to balance the scales in your favor. And that's what He does. We have hope in God because He tips the scales in our favor, right? We can't balance us out. We can't do anything to be justified before God on our own. And this is Christian theology, so God made a way to balance it out. In fact, He even then tips the scales in our favor. He doesn't just balance us out. He says, I want more for you. I want to lift you up. I've got a plan and a purpose for your life. Yeah, without me, you don't measure up, but with me, I've got a plan for you. You can be a part of my kingdom. Your gifts and talents and abilities, yeah, your days are numbered, but the numbers that you're here, they can count for doing kingdom impact. And Jesus said like, hey, I'm going to tip the scales in your favor. Now you go out and tell people the good news. See that word divided, you guys? That's a choice. That's a choice. We have a choice whether we want to be divided or united. We have a choice with that in our lives, in our families, in our church, but we have a choice with that with God. We don't have to be like King Belshazzar, who was divided and done away with. We can choose, God, tip the scales in my favor. And God says, absolutely. That's the free gift of grace I want to give to you. If you accept that, I'm going to tip them in your favor. And I've got a plan for you. Isn't that good news, guys? Man, that's what I learned from Daniel, right? That's amazing. That little verse in there. You've been measured and found wanting. God says, you've been measured and found wanting. I'm going to tip the scales in your favor. We're not perfect, but God, through his eyes, says, I can use this for an amazing plan. So, unlike Belshazzar, we have truth. Unlike Belshazzar, we have truth. You guys, we can trust in God's word. We can. We don't want to be brought into a pluralistic culture that says all truth is truth. That's not true, right? We don't want to be brought into a pluralistic culture, all religion is fine. That's not true. We have the truth of the Bible, and man, the Bible, the more I read it, the more I'm amazed by it. By the authority of the Bible, by the truth in the Bible. Now, we don't know everything about everything, right? There's some gray areas, but I believe that in the most important things, we can know and stand on the truth of God's Word. When it comes to all kinds of things in life, when it comes to God and theology, we can know the truth. When it comes to relationships and sexuality, we can know the truth. When it comes to how important life is and how sacred it is and how we're supposed to treat each other and serve each other and how we're supposed to look at fellow people made in His image, we can know the truth. We have the truth, and the Bible says if you have the truth will set you free, right? Unlike Belshazzar, we have the truth, and we need to believe in the truth. Unlike Belshazzar, we have hope. We have hope. Their world in Babylon, 550 BC, was a world of chaos. The Medes and the Persians were on their doorstep. It was chaos. People just doing whatever they want. Just a bunch of chaos. Sounds similar to our culture today, right? We live in a divided world, more divided than I've ever experienced in my life. We live in a world where wars are back in style again. Right? There was a time when wars were not happening that much. Now wars are all over the place, all kinds of chaos, all kinds of division. People don't know what's truth and what isn't truth and all that. I mean, it's just, I didn't see it coming, you guys. I'm an optimist. I always think when things are good, they'll probably just continue to get better. Things have not all gotten better. In that, now I'm still an optimist, but I'm surprised by the chaos of our world right now. Is anybody else surprised by the chaos of our world right now? Man, I am. But here's the thing. We have hope, right? We have hope in the chaos because God has tipped the scales in our favor, and He's got a plan for us in the middle of all this chaos. So if our world is divided, if there's all these things going on in our world, I'm not going into depression over that. I'm not hiding because of that. I'm not stressed out or filled with anxiety because of that. I'm saying, God, where do you want to use me in that? See, I'm filled with hope. And even if the world does not get better, I'm still filled with hope because we can have hope in Christ. We can, even though the world is in chaos. It was back then. It is now. It probably will be for a time to come. But we can have hope anyways. And I want to encourage you guys in this. If the world feels a little bit chaotic, if you put your faith in Jesus, you can have hope in the chaos. You don't have to live in hopelessness because the world looks a little hopeless right now. You can live in the hope of Jesus. And I believe that when the world gets a little darker, my light just defaults a little brighter. I don't even have to do anything. My light will shine brighter if the world gets darker. But I want to do something in this world. I want to be a part of spreading that good news and spreading that hope. And man, when the world is dark, how much more do we need to spread the good news? All the more. So, we have hope because God has tipped the scales in our favor. And as we get ready to close, I want you to take this home. Just two things. Number one is just a challenge to you to have confidence. Have confidence. I love how Daniel just stepped up and said, keep your gifts. I don't need all your stuff. Let me just tell you the truth. Let me just tell you. And it maybe for those of us who are a little older, 50s, 60s, maybe we can have that confidence because of the wisdom of our age, right? Like Daniel did. But even those for younger than that, have confidence. Man, there's all kinds of chaos. Have confidence. We can have confidence. God is doing good things in our lives. He's going to tip the scales in our favors. Hey, you guys, I did not measure up in high school, but I'm telling you, when I turned my life to Jesus, in my senior year, January of my senior year, 1991, God turned my life around. He gave me the confidence. You guys, I was not a confident person. I was the person in the back. There was a reason I was rebelling, because I had no confidence to step up and do something with my life. Man, when I turned to God, you guys, I went into college. I ended up on top of the class. I still can't play sports well, but I can skateboard, you know. But Kayani would beat me in volleyball any day, right? So I can't do that, but you know, God tips the scales in my favor. Have confidence. If you ever lack confidence, know that God is on your side. So have confidence. Just take that one thing. Have confidence, but then with your confidence, how can God use you with your confidence? Be confident in Christ, then God, how can you use me? Everyone is different. God's going to use every person in a different way. How can you use me, God, on my sports team? How can you use me, God, in the village across the street, right? How can you use me, God, in my workplace? How can you use me, God, in my school? How can you use me, God, in my family? How can you use me, God, with the gifts and talents that I've been given? I've only been given a couple, but I bet you've got a plan for me in those couple gifts that you've given me. How can you be used? Have confidence. Ask God how you can be used for His kingdom. Because I guarantee you, God can use you in the kingdom. Because it's a choice not to be divided and be united with Him. It's a choice to accept the scales tipped in our favor. Choose that, and God's got a plan for you. I'm going to invite the praise team up to close us in a worship song.